The Sapphire Widow, a Hercule Poirot. Mystery. There are stories that begin quietly, with a whisper of suspicion, a flicker of unease. And there are others that arrive dressed in velvet and perfume, their glamour masking something dark beneath. This, dear listener, is the latter sort. It began not in some fog-drenched alley or lonely village, but in the mirrored halls of Schönbrunn Palace, Vienna, where a royal wedding promised unity, joy, and the renewal of old European grace. Outside, the winter night glittered with frost. Inside, 1,000 candles burned against the marble, as if daring the shadows to enter. Among the guests, diplomats, duchesses, princes, and those who merely pretended to be such, moved a small, precise man in patent leather shoes. His moustache gleamed like a golden accent beneath the chandeliers. His eyes, bright and assessing, missed nothing. His name was Hercule Poirot. He had come to Vienna not for intrigue, but for ceremony. Yet where there is grandeur, there is greed. Where there are diamonds and titles, there is always one heart quietly planning the unforgivable. And by the end of that night, the palace that had echoed with waltzes would resound with a single scream. Chapter 1. The Wedding at Schönbrunn Palace. The carriages began arriving just before dusk. Snow had fallen through the afternoon, softening the city into a postcard of gold light and silence. The great palace stood ready, every window blazing, every soldier at attention. Inside, the royal orchestra tuned their strings. The scent of lilies and champagne mingled with wax and perfume. Lady Helena Warwick, daughter of the late Baron von Rhine and of Countess Isolde Warwick, was to wed Archduke Leopold of Austria. The union was to be a symbol of peace between two restless nations, although those who understood power knew that peace was merely another form of theatre. Countess Isolde herself, the so-called Sapphire Widow, was the quiet star of the evening. Draped in silver satin, she wore about her throat the legendary sapphire of Silesia, a stone so deep in colour that it seemed almost black until it caught the light. Newspapers had written of it for weeks. Artists begged to paint it. To see it glint now at her pulse was to see history itself sparkle. Poirot observed from near the terrace doors, hands clasped neatly before him. He had no official role here, merely a guest of Chief Inspector Japp's Austrian counterpart, Colonel Weiss. "You'll enjoy the wedding," Weiss had said cheerfully. "No mysteries, I promise you." But already Poirot had noticed things that did not fit neatly together. A servant polishing the same glass twice while his eyes darted toward the jewel. A nervous young man pretending to study the ceiling when the bride passed. A clock striking 7 while every other in the palace read 6:30. When the orchestra struck its first note and the guests rose for the procession, Poirot's gaze flicked to the Countess. She smiled at the crowd, poised, serene, but beneath the polish there was tension. The hand that adjusted her necklace trembled. The ceremony was flawless. Vows spoken in 2 languages, applause that filled the vaulted chapel, the swell of organ and choir. Champagne flowed as the guests drifted toward the ballroom, where the first dance of the newlyweds shimmered under 1,000 crystals. It was during this dance that Poirot saw the moment everything changed. Across the floor, by a column draped in ivy, a figure moved quickly, too quickly, toward the dais where the Countess had left her silver evening purse. The movement was smooth, practiced. Poirot took 1 step forward, then another. The waltz ended. Applause erupted. and in that instant the palace lights flickered. Only for a heartbeat. Yet when they steadied again, the Countess's throat was bare. The sapphire of Silesia had vanished. A murmur spread like wind through the hall. Someone laughed nervously. The orchestra faltered. Poirot reached the dais. The purse lay open, the clasp broken clean. "Colonel Weiss," he called sharply. "Seal the doors. No one leaves." But even as Weiss barked orders, another sound broke the confusion. A shrill, piercing scream from the east wing. Poirot turned. The bride's veil flashed white in the crowd as she stumbled toward the sound, shouting her mother's name. When they reached the corridor, the scene froze them all. The door to the Countess's chamber stood ajar. Beyond it, candlelight wavered against silk and shadow. And on the floor, beside the overturned chair, lay Countess Isolde Warwick. Her silver gown stained dark, her eyes open and unseeing. Poirot knelt beside her. His fingertips brushed the edge of a fallen candlestick, the faint trace of gunpowder near her sleeve, the open window rattling softly in the wind. Then he looked up at the silent ring of faces, nobles, servants, strangers in jewels, and said quietly, "This, I think, is not merely a theft. This is murder, and it was committed in the most beautiful room in Vienna." The chandeliers above flickered once more, as if the palace itself had blinked. And outside, the snow kept falling, covering everything. Footprints, carriage tracks, and, for a little while, the truth. Chapter 2. The Locked Chamber. The scream still rang through the marble halls as Hercule Poirot straightened from the Countess's lifeless body. Around him, the corridor of Schönbrunn Palace had fallen into stunned silence. A gust of winter wind blew through the open window, scattering pale petals from the vase, overturned on the sill. Somewhere in the distance, a waltz record still played faintly, the last echo of celebration now twisted into something uncanny. Poirot glanced at the clock above the mantelpiece. 10 minutes past midnight. It was always useful, he reminded himself, to note the time when life changed direction. "Colonel Weiss," he said quietly, "if you would be so good as to close that window. No one is to touch anything." Weiss nodded, barking orders to the footman. The heavy velvet curtains fell shut, muting the night. Poirot turned back to the body. Countess Isolde Warwick lay on her side, one hand reaching toward the hearth, as though she had been trying to grasp something, or someone. Her silver gown shimmered under the light, immaculate except for the dark stains spreading across the bodice. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared past Poirot's shoulder. There was, he thought, a terrible dignity even in her death. He crouched low, careful not to disturb the fabric. "Gunshot," Weiss said grimly behind him. "Self-inflicted by the look of it. The pistol's there." Poirot followed his gaze. The weapon, a small silver revolver, rested just beyond her fingertips. It gleamed too cleanly, too conveniently. He studied it, then the small scorch mark on the silk near her collarbone. "No powder burns," he murmured. "And she was right. Handed, I am told." "Yes," Weiss confirmed. Poirot nodded slightly. "Then, my dear Colonel, I would not wager much on this being suicide." Weiss frowned. "But the door was locked from within. We had to force it." Poirot looked towards the broken doorframe. Splinters lay on the carpet, scattered like matchsticks. He stepped closer, examining the key that still hung in the lock, on the inside. "Locked, yes," he said softly. "But tell me, before you broke it down, who first found her?" "The bride herself, Lady Helena." Weiss said. She heard the scream. Several guests saw her run this way. Poirot's eyes moved to the doorway, where the young bride stood now, her wedding gown streaked with dust, face pale but eyes dry. She seemed too calm for shock, a kind of fragile control that worried him. "Lady Helena," he said gently, "forgive me, but when you reached this room, how long after the scream was it?" "Seconds," she whispered. "I was in the corridor already. I thought someone had dropped something, a glass, perhaps. Then I heard my mother cry out." "And the door?" "It was closed, locked. We shouted. Colonel Weiss came running." Poirot nodded again. "And before that, did you see anyone near this corridor? Anyone at all?" Her brow furrowed. "No one. Everyone was still in the ballroom, or I thought they were." Poirot noticed the small hesitation before her final words. He let it rest for now. "Merci, madame," he said softly, instinctively reverting to his old politeness, though she would not have known the word. He turned back to the chamber. Something in the air felt wrong. Death always left traces, disorder, haste. But here there was a kind of deliberate stillness, as though someone had arranged the scene like a painting. He moved to the writing desk. A letter lay half-folded there, addressed but not sealed. The first line read, "My dearest Helena, there are truths a mother cannot confess without destroying what she loves most." Poirot read no further. He had no wish to violate grief more than necessary. But he noted the faintest trace of ash at the edge of the paper, as if something else had been burned. Perhaps another page torn away. He looked to the fireplace. The logs were cold, unlit, but in the grate lay a small mound of grey ash. He took a pair of tongs and lifted one corner of charred parchment. Faded words emerged. "Mine. Papers. Safeguard." The rest crumbled at his touch. Behind him, Weiss spoke again. Could she have surprised a thief? Someone stealing her jewels? Poirot's eyes went to the dressing table. Empty velvet cases lay open. The silver combs, the pearl earrings, all untouched. Only the necklace was gone. He turned slowly toward Weiss. "My dear Colonel, if this were robbery, it was performed by a thief who ignored gold and chose death instead. No, the theft was the prelude, not the purpose." A murmur spread among the small circle of guests gathered at the door. Poirot heard fragments. Suicide. Nerves. Curse of the Sapphire. The last phrase made him glance up sharply. "Who spoke?" he asked. It was an elderly lady in emerald green, the Dowager Duchess of Malthorpe, one of the English guests. "It's what the papers say," she stammered, "that the Sapphire is cursed. Every owner comes to grief. Her husband died young, did he not? A scandal years ago." Poirot inclined his head politely, though his mind was already working. Scandals, deaths, jewels. Such stories always contained both lies and truths. He moved toward the window. The frost on the sill had been disturbed, the latch broken clean, yet there were no footprints in the snow outside. He leaned closer, inspecting the brass. It had been snapped inward, not forced from outside. He straightened. "A clever illusion," he said softly. "Someone wished us to believe a thief entered here, but the intruder was already inside." Lady Helena shivered, folding her arms. Weiss looked unconvinced. "Inside? But who, monsieur? We have guards at every door." Poirot's voice dropped. "Then the question becomes simpler, my friend. Who among the guests would the Countess have allowed to enter freely?" He spent the next hour walking the palace, step by step. The grandeur of Schönbrunn seemed colder now, the painted ceilings indifferent to the human tragedy below. Servants whispered in corners, guards stood stiff at attention. Poirot stopped often, pausing at doorways, peering at carpets, tracing faint scuff marks where none should be. By 2 o'clock, most of the guests had been gathered in the blue salon, a grand room lined with mirrors. Colonel Weiss was questioning them formally, taking notes in his severe Austrian manner. Poirot stood by the mantel, listening, his head tilted slightly, eyes half closed. One by one, the statements came. No one had seen anything. No one had heard a shot. No one had left the ballroom between 11 and midnight. Poirot finally spoke. Then, my friends, the sound of the gun was muffled. A silencer, perhaps, or something softer still. A murmur ran through the group. Weiss frowned. But then, monsieur, how did Lady Helena hear the scream? Poirot's gaze moved to the bride again. Because it was not the Countess who screamed, he said quietly. It was someone else, perhaps the murderer, startled by what they had done. Helena looked at him, her eyes wide but unreadable. Later, when the guests were dismissed under guard, Poirot lingered once more in the chamber. The body had been removed, the floor cleaned, but traces remained, impressions in the carpet, a faint scent of perfume that was not jasmine, but something rarer, violets mixed with smoke. He stooped near the dressing table and found what he had been seeking, a single glass bead, sapphire blue, lodged beneath the leg of the stool. It caught the light like a fragment of sky. Poirot smiled faintly. A clue so small, yet so precise, he murmured. Whoever planned this murder, they have the mind of an artist, but art, like crime, leaves its signature. He slipped the bead into his pocket, turned to the empty room, and looked once more at the window. Outside, the snow had thickened, sealing the world in white silence. Locked doors, broken latches, a jewel that brings death. Ah, but none of these are mysteries, he whispered. The true mystery is the heart, and what it will do to protect itself. And with that, he closed the door behind him. Chapter 3. Shadows among the guests. The following morning broke pale and brittle over Vienna. Snow lay heavy upon the city, muting the clatter of carriages and softening even the harsh angles of the palace roofs. Inside Schönbrunn, however, silence had a sharper edge. No music echoed now, no laughter spilled from the marble corridors. The air itself seemed to recoil from last night's tragedy. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever in a grey morning suit, descended the grand staircase with deliberate calm. His moustache, waxed to perfection, gleamed faintly under the chandelier. He looked, as one footman whispered to another, like a man immune to chaos. But Poirot was never immune. He merely observed chaos from a higher vantage point. In the blue salon, Colonel Weiss awaited him beside a table laid for breakfast that no one had touched. Silver urns stood cooling, the scent of coffee mingled with dust. Weiss looked exhausted, his uniform immaculate, but his eyes red from sleeplessness. "The coroner has confirmed your suspicion," Weiss said without preamble. "The Countess was shot from a distance of 3 feet. The angle suggests the shooter stood to her left. Immediate death, no sign of struggle." Poirot nodded. "And the weapon?" "Wiped clean. No prints." "Ah." Poirot seated himself with care. Always the small perfections that reveal a great imperfection, mon ami. A suicide does not polish the instrument of her death. Weiss folded his arms. We've searched every servant's quarters, every guest suite. The sapphire necklace is gone. Poirot looked mildly surprised. Entirely gone? Weiss hesitated. Not quite. The clasp was found, broken in the bridal suite. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. In Lady Helena's room? Yes, under the edge of the carpet. The maid discovered it at dawn. The detective leaned back, fingers steepled. So, the bride inherits both the title and the suspicion. Weiss frowned. Surely you're not suggesting? I suggest nothing. I only observe. Poirot rose, walked to the window, and gazed out at the snow-covered gardens. Tell me, Colonel, who had the most to gain from the Countess's death? Financially, Lady Helena inherits the estates, though not the jewels. Those were entailed to a museum in London, I believe. Poirot smiled faintly. Then perhaps our motive is not gain, but fear, or love. The two so often resemble one another when viewed from the wrong angle. They began the interviews soon after breakfast. The guests were gathered once more in the blue salon, now stripped of flowers and decorations. What had been a ballroom of celebration was now a chamber of suspicion. Poirot preferred to begin with the least likely suspects. For in the unlikelihood, he often said, one finds the carelessness of truth. The bride entered first. Her ivory gown had been replaced by a simple black dress, but she carried herself with the same poise. Too much poise, Poirot thought, for one who had lost her mother hours ago. Her eyes, however, told another story, rimmed red, dry as ash. Lady Helena, he began softly, you will forgive my intrusion into your grief. I must ask questions that seem unkind. I understand, Monsieur Poirot, she said. Please, go on. He watched her hands. They were still, folded perfectly in her lap. Your mother's last letter, do you know of it? Her eyes flickered. Only that she had been writing one. To me. The police showed me part of it. Did she fear someone? A pause. She was anxious. She said things at dinner that made little sense. She spoke of the sapphire, of my father, of debts unpaid. Not money, but something else. Guilt, perhaps? She flinched. I don't know. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Did she approve of your marriage? Yes, she said too quickly. Entirely. Entirely, Poirot repeated gently. I am told the groom was not of her choosing. Helena hesitated, then looked him squarely in the eye. Mother was protective. She never approved of anyone, but she was not cruel. Poirot inclined his head. Protective, yes, perhaps protective to a fault. She rose abruptly. Are we finished? For now, he said. But remember, mademoiselle, grief is a mirror. Sometimes it reflects what we most wish to hide. The groom was next, tall, dark, with the careless confidence of an English aristocrat accustomed to admiration. He looked more irritated than mourning. This is absurd, he declared as he entered. My mother, in law's death, is a tragedy, yes, but this police inquisition? Poirot raised a hand. Monsieur, calm yourself. Truth is like champagne. It must not be shaken, or it loses its sparkle. Adrian glared. Fine. Ask your questions. You were in the ballroom all evening? Yes, dancing, drinking, like everyone else. Poirot's gaze flicked to Weiss, who made a note. And after 11? I stepped out for air. The place was stifling. Alone? Adrian hesitated. Yes, alone. Ah, you returned before midnight. Of course. Poirot tapped his chin. Forgive my curiosity. When you married Lady Helena, you also married into her mother's fortune. No? Adrian's smile was brittle. My wife's wealth is her own. I'm not short of money, Monsieur Poirot. No, Poirot said softly. But perhaps you were short of approval. The Countess, she did not think you worthy. Adrian's jaw tightened. She made her opinions clear enough, but that doesn't make me a murderer. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, but it does make you a man with motive. Merci, milord. Viola was the bride's closest friend, a pretty young woman with nervous hands and a tendency to look everywhere except at Poirot. She had been staying in the guest wing next to the Countess's chambers. You heard nothing during the night? Poirot asked. Only the scream. It woke me. And before that? No, I was asleep. Poirot observed her carefully. There was a faint bruise on her wrist, hastily hidden beneath lace. You were close to Lady Helena? Yes, since childhood. And her husband? A pause. We've all known each other for years. Poirot smiled faintly. That was not my question. She flushed. I don't know what you mean. Then perhaps I have my answer. By noon, the interviews had drawn a pattern, faint but distinct. Jealousy, money, secrets buried beneath silk and ceremony. Yet none explained the locked door. None explained the missing necklace or the scream. Poirot returned to the scene once more. The chamber was quiet, sealed under guard. He paced slowly, counting his steps, his gaze darting from fireplace to mirror to rug. He had the sense of something deliberately altered, as if a small, inconvenient truth had been erased. He stopped before the mirror. Its surface was spotless, but the screws at its edge were loose, and a faint outline of dust marked where it had been moved recently. He tapped the glass with a knuckle. Hollow. Behind it, perhaps, a cavity. Poirot turned to Weiss. A screwdriver, if you please. When the mirror came free, a small recess was revealed, scarcely large enough for a book. Inside lay a velvet pouch, empty save for a single note written in neat feminine handwriting. If you are reading this, then it is already too late. The Sapphire must never leave this house. It was paid for with blood once. It will demand more if we are careless again. Poirot read it twice, then replaced it carefully. He felt a rare chill along his spine. So the Countess had known she was in danger, and she had hidden the truth behind glass. As dusk fell, Poirot sat alone in the library, thinking. The palace creaked in the cold. From somewhere in the distance came the faint sound of a violin. A servant, perhaps, playing to calm the nerves of the household. He closed his eyes. The clues swirled before him like dancers. A locked door, a broken clasp, a missing jewel, a scream that was not hers. At last, he murmured, "It is not a puzzle of theft, but of inheritance. The sapphire does not bring death. It reveals it." Outside, the snow began again, covering footprints, erasing traces, but not for long. Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, would uncover every secret Schönbrunn tried to bury. Chapter 4. The Blue Sapphire's Curse. The fire in the Schönbrunn library had burned low by morning. The logs hissed quietly in the grate, releasing the scent of pine and smoke that mingled with the faint metallic chill of Vienna's winter air. Poirot stood before the mantel, gazing not at the flames, but at the reflection in the glass, framed portrait above it, a portrait of Countess Isolde Warwick in her youth. She was radiant, poised, the famous sapphire of Silesia glittering at her throat. But it was her eyes that drew him. Serene, yes, but behind them a hint of sorrow that no painter's brush could conceal. Colonel Weiss entered softly, a sheaf of documents in hand. "You've had no sleep, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. For the mind, sleep is sometimes an interruption, not a necessity. Weiss placed the papers on the desk. You asked for everything we could find on the Sapphire. This is from the Countess's archives. Family records, insurance claims, letters. It's quite a history. Poirot turned from the fire and seated himself with precision. Tell me, my friend, does it contain what I suspect, a trail of misfortune? Weiss nodded grimly. Misfortune and death. The gem first appeared in the 1820s, part of the royal treasury of Mysore. It vanished during the British campaigns in India, resurfaced a decade later in London. The owner at the time, a collector named Sir Giles Warwick. Poirot's eyebrows rose. The Countess's grandfather? The same. He purchased the Sapphire under questionable circumstances. 3 months later, his wife died of poisoning. A servant was accused, but the case never settled. Poirot murmured, "A jewel bought with guilt, and the guilt, it seems, remained in the family." Weiss continued, "Since then, every generation that possessed the Sapphire has suffered some tragedy, a drowning, a duel, a disappearance." He hesitated. The Countess herself refused to part with it. She insured it for an absurd sum, but would never sell it. Some said she believed it protected her. Others said it haunted her. Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. And yet she wore it to her daughter's wedding, a public display despite her fears. Perhaps she wished to show that she no longer feared the curse. Or perhaps, Weiss said slowly, she wanted the world to know she was not afraid to die. Poirot gave him a sharp look. An interesting remark, mon ami, but we must not allow superstition to cloud logic. There is no curse, only motive disguised as myth. Later that morning, Poirot made his way through the east wing of the palace, cane in hand, every step measured and deliberate. The servants avoided his gaze, whispering behind polished doors. To them, he was both saviour and intruder, the man who could name a murderer, but only by tearing open every secret the household possessed. In the Countess's private dressing room, sunlight fell through lace curtains onto a writing desk cluttered with perfume bottles and stationery. Poirot examined each item with the care of a jeweller inspecting gems. He found the faintest trace of ash on the corner of a burned letter. The signature, half visible, read, Adrian W. Mon Dieu, he murmured. A correspondence between the groom and the victim. Interesting. Very interesting. The door creaked behind him. Lady Helena entered quietly, her black veil lifted back. "You should not be here alone," she said. "My mother's room. It feels wrong now." Poirot bowed slightly. "Forgive me, mademoiselle. I intrude only for truth's sake. Tell me, your husband? He was on good terms with your mother?" Helena's face went pale. "They respected each other." "Ah, respect," Poirot said softly. "A word that often hides dislike. And yet she kept his letters. Why, I wonder?" Helena's eyes darted to the desk. "She kept everything. Receipts, invitations." "But not burned letters," Poirot interrupted gently. "No, those are kept only when they mean something." She said nothing. Poirot turned, studying her. "You are afraid, mademoiselle. But of what? Of what your husband has done? Or what your mother discovered?" Her voice broke. "Please stop." Poirot inclined his head. "As you wish. But truth, like a wound, does not close because we look away." He left her there, standing by the window, her reflection trembling in the glass like a ghost. That afternoon, Poirot found Adrian Warwick in the smoking room with 2 other guests, Major Harrington, an old friend of the Countess, and Dr. Emil Kraus, the palace physician. The men rose as he entered, the air thick with cigar smoke and silence. "Ah, gentlemen," Poirot said pleasantly. "I intrude again, oui? But I find conversation after tragedy most illuminating." Adrian forced a smile. "Still playing the bloodhound, Poirot?" "Always," Poirot replied, seating himself gracefully. "A murder, you see, is like a game of chess. One must watch not only the king, but the pawns who pretend to be unimportant." Harrington chuckled uneasily. "You think one of us is a pawn, then?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps. Or perhaps one of you is the hand that moves them." He turned to Dr. Kraus. "You examined the body, I believe." "Yes. The Countess was killed instantly, one bullet to the heart." "From a small weapon?" "A pistol, likely .32 caliber. The wound was clean, powder burns faint." Poirot nodded. "And no signs of struggle, yes?" "None." "Then," Poirot mused, "the killer was someone she trusted, someone close enough to stand before her without fear." Adrian exhaled sharply. "You're implying family." Poirot spread his hands. "I imply nothing, monsieur, but I observe everything." That evening, as the snow thickened over the palace grounds, Poirot asked Weiss to accompany him to the archives. The palace librarian, a timid man named Herr Schultz, led them through narrow corridors stacked with old ledgers and correspondence. Dust drifted in the air like ancient breath. Poirot ran a gloved finger along a shelf marked "Warwick Family, Private Papers." "Here," he murmured. "The Countess's father, Sir Reginald Warwick, a diplomat, yes?" Weiss nodded. "Posted in India before the Sapphire came into their possession." Poirot pulled a bundle of letters tied with fading ribbon. The ink was sepia, the handwriting precise. As he read, his brows drew together. "My dearest Isolde, I fear the jewel you so admired carries with it more than beauty. It was taken, not purchased. The rightful owner died protecting it. If anything should happen to me, you must see that it is returned to its origin. Promise me that, child, or it will follow us all." Poirot lowered the letter slowly. "So, the curse is not of mystic origin. It is the curse of guilt. The sapphire is stolen property, and the family's fortune built upon it has been haunted ever since." Weiss exhaled. "Then her death may be the result of conscience," Poirot finished softly, "or of someone who wished to prevent the truth from coming out." He folded the letter carefully. "Colonel, summon the household. Tonight we make an experiment." At 9 o'clock, the great hall was filled once more, not with music and laughter, but with the heavy stillness of fear. Guests stood in clusters, whispering. Poirot stood before them all, his small figure commanding absolute attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the Countess Warwick was not murdered for greed, nor even jealousy. She was killed because of a secret, a truth buried for generations, hidden within the very jewel that made her famous." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Poirot lifted the velvet pouch Weiss had found behind the mirror. This pouch once held the sapphire of Silesia, but within it was also a note, a warning from the Countess herself. She knew the jewel's history. She intended to make it public. Someone could not allow that. He turned his gaze upon Adrian. "You, my lord, had debts in London. You feared disgrace. Your mother, in law's revelation, would have ended your fortune and your marriage." Adrian's face drained of colour. "That's absurd." Poirot's tone sharpened. "Then perhaps it was you, Lady Helena? To protect your husband's name? Or Miss Greer, who loves the husband herself, the crowd murmured. Viola Greer's hands trembled visibly. I didn't. Poirot raised a finger. No, mademoiselle, you did not pull the trigger, but you know who did. Her eyes widened in terror. I can't. You can, Poirot said gently, because you saw him leave the Countess's room that night, because you heard the gunshot before the lights flickered. Speak. Viola's composure shattered. He told me it was an accident, she whispered. He said she found out. She was going to tell Helena everything. Adrian lunged forward. Lies! But Poirot's voice cut through the uproar like steel. Enough. The truth is already written upon your face, monsieur. The Countess discovered your affair with her daughter's closest friend, Worms. And the forged letter of credit you intended to use to cover your gambling debts. She confronted you. In your rage, you took the pistol from her desk. You killed her, and in panic, you staged the theft. Adrian's shoulders sagged, his mask crumpling. For a moment, silence. Then, very quietly, he said, She would have destroyed everything. Poirot's gaze softened. And now, monsieur, you have destroyed yourself. He turned away as Weiss stepped forward, placing the man under arrest. Later, when the hall had emptied and the echoes of boots faded down the corridor, Poirot stood alone once more before the great mirrors of Schönbrunn. He looked at his own reflection, small, precise, unflinching. The curse of the sapphire, he murmured, was never in the stone. It was in the hearts of those who believed it gave them power. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over Vienna, pale and forgiving. The snow had stopped. The palace was quiet again, and in its silence, Hercule Poirot finally allowed himself a sigh of weary satisfaction. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Dead. It was 3 days after the arrest when Poirot began to feel the familiar unease. That faint, whispering discord that told him something within the pattern still refused to fit. Vienna, muffled in snow, moved on as though the tragedy at Schönbrunn Palace were already half forgotten. Newspapers printed Adrian Warwick's confession in bold type. Groom slays Countess in duel feud, Sapphire still missing. Society tutted, sighed, and turned its eyes back to waltzes and theatre. But Poirot, Hercule Poirot, was not satisfied. For 3 nights he had lain awake at the Imperial Hotel, staring at the ceiling, while his little grey cells rearranged themselves in agitation. The confession was too neat, too symmetrical. And neatness, he knew, was not truth. It was performance. On the 4th morning, he returned to Schönbrunn. The palace stood silent now, stripped of guests and gaiety. Only a skeleton staff remained, moving like shadows through echoing corridors. Poirot's footsteps rang clearly upon the marble as he was admitted once more to the East Wing. Colonel Weiss awaited him in the library, looking weary but content. "Well, my friend," Weiss said, pouring 2 cups of black coffee. "Our case is closed. Adrian Warwick will stand trial in London. The sapphire, sadly, is lost. Perhaps sold before the murder, perhaps hidden too well to be found." Poirot accepted his cup, but did not drink. "And yet, mon cher Weiss, I find no peace in this perfection." Weiss frowned. "You have doubts?" "Doubts, always," Poirot replied softly. "It is the nature of the detective to be dissatisfied. There are small inconsistencies that disturb me, like grit beneath silk." He set down the cup with a faint click. The clasp of the necklace, for instance, found beneath the carpet in the bridal suite. "Tell me, Why there? Weiss hesitated. He could have dropped it when he hid the weapon. Could have, Poirot repeated. But he did not need to. He was panicked, oui, but his every other action was deliberate. He arranged the scene. He wiped the pistol. He feigned theft. Such a man does not leave behind a clasp under the carpet of a room he has no reason to enter. Weiss said nothing. Poirot's voice lowered. No, mon ami, that clasp was placed there by another hand. He returned to the Countess's chamber once more. The scent of lilac lingered faintly, though the flowers had long been removed. The bullet hole in the wainscoting had been repaired, the carpets replaced. Yet Poirot felt the ghost of the scene hang in the air like frost. He stood by the dressing table, his gaze fixed upon the mirror. Behind it, the small recess, the letter, the empty velvet pouch. He lifted the pouch once more, turning it over carefully. Then he noticed something he had missed before, the faintest shimmer of blue dust in the lining. Not sapphire dust, glass. Mais non, he whispered. Not the stone of legend, but imitation. The Countess was wearing a replica. He drew in a long breath. Then the real sapphire of Silesia. Where is it? At that moment the door opened quietly. Lady Helena Warwick stood there, pale but composed. You came back, she said. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, mademoiselle. I find it difficult to leave a room that still has secrets to tell. She hesitated. They say you're never satisfied. Only when something is missing. Her eyes flicked toward the desk. They've taken everything now. Mother's papers, her letters. There's nothing left. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet you remain. Why, I wonder? She looked away. Because I can't leave her here. This house, it feels like she's still inside it. Poirot took a step closer. Tell me, Lady Helena, when your mother died, you cried out first, did you not? She nodded faintly. Yes, I heard the shot. And you were the first to arrive? Yes. And the door, it was locked? Yes. Poirot tilted his head. How curious. And yet the key was found inside the room. So, either she locked herself in after being shot, which is impossible, or someone else did. Helena's breath caught. What are you saying? Poirot's eyes held hers. I am saying, mademoiselle, that the door was locked after you entered. By you. For a moment, the silence was like thunder. That's not true, she whispered. Poirot's voice softened. It is not accusation, merely deduction. You arrived first, yes, but you did not open the door. It was already ajar. You screamed, and others came running. When the others arrived, you were standing near the window, not the body. Why? Tears welled in her eyes. I couldn't bear to look at her. Or, Poirot said quietly, you were hiding something. She turned away, trembling. You don't understand. Then make me understand, Lady Helena, because your husband's guilt fits too well. It is convenient, perfect, and therefore false. He may have been a scoundrel, yes, but not a killer of precision. And this murder, it was executed with precision. Helena's voice broke. She was going to ruin us, ruin him. She said she'd reveal the truth, that the sapphire was stolen, that father's fortune was a lie. Adrian didn't care, but I did. Do you understand what it means to lose everything your family built? Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. And so, you confronted her? She laughed at me, Helena said bitterly. Said she'd rather see the family destroyed than let me live with deceit. She wouldn't listen. I didn't mean to. Her words died in the air. Poirot said gently. But you did. You took the pistol from her desk, and in the struggle, it fired. You locked the door to make it look like theft, to protect your husband, and then you placed the clasp in your room to lead suspicion elsewhere. When Adrian found you later, he took the blame willingly, thinking to protect you. She sank into the chair, face buried in her hands. He was a fool, but he loved me. Poirot sighed. Ah, mademoiselle, love can be as dangerous as greed. It blinds us, and then it buries us. He turned toward the mirror once more. But one question remains. Where is the real Sapphire? Helena's voice was barely a whisper. Safe, where it should be. Poirot glanced toward the portrait above the fireplace, the young countess painted in her prime. Something glimmered faintly at her throat in the candlelight. Ah, Poirot murmured. He stepped closer. The painter was clever, but the countess more so. She had the real stone set within the frame, hidden behind its painted twin. To anyone else, it was art. To her, protection. He pressed the lower edge of the frame, and with a soft click, a small compartment opened. Inside, wrapped in silk, the sapphire of Silesia gleamed with a cold, living fire. Helena looked up, eyes wide. She hid it there all this time. Poirot nodded. She meant to return it as her father wished, but she waited too long, and so it claimed her, as guilt always does. He turned to Weiss, who had entered silently at the door. Colonel, it seems our case is not quite so simple. The murderer has confessed, but not the one we arrested. Weiss looked at Helena, then back at Poirot. You're certain? Poirot sighed. Certain? No, but I am convinced. Helena rose unsteadily. What will you do? Poirot regarded her for a long moment. Then very quietly he said, Madame, I will tell the truth, but I will tell it gently. She closed her eyes. Thank you. He turned to Weiss. Arrange for Lady Helena's statement, and for the sapphire, it must be sent to its rightful home. Perhaps, at last, the curse will sleep. That night, as Poirot prepared to leave Vienna, he stood once more by the carriage, gazing up at the palace, its windows black, its grandeur dimmed. The snow had ceased, only a thin mist drifted over the gardens. From somewhere in the distance came the faint toll of a church bell. Weiss joined him, hat in hand. You believe the family will ever recover? Poirot smiled faintly. Families recover, yes, but innocence once lost does not. It hides, like the jewel, waiting to be found again. He stepped into the carriage. Come, my friend, the train for Paris awaits, and perhaps, with luck, I will find a case involving nothing more dangerous than a missing umbrella. Weiss chuckled softly. Do you ever rest, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot settled his hat with immaculate care. Never, mon ami. Rest is for the dull, and life, alas, is full of echoes. As the carriage rolled away through the snow, the palace receded behind them, a monument of beauty, secrets, and sorrow. And somewhere deep within its painted walls, the sapphire gleamed once more, reflecting not light, but memory. Chapter 6. The Last Waltz of Vienna. The train slid out of Vienna under a pale moon, its steel wheels whispering over the frozen tracks. Within the first-class compartment, Hercule Poirot sat with his hands folded neatly upon his knees, his small leather valise beside him, and his hat placed exactly in the center of the rack above. Outside, the world was white and silver, the snow unbroken, the hills glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the compartment was warm, the lamps glowing with a soft golden hue. A faint hum of waltz music drifted from the dining car, distant yet distinct, a ghost of the city he was leaving behind. Poirot leaned back, his reflection staring back at him from the window, the impeccable moustaches, the egg-shaped head, the faintly weary eyes. He thought of Lady Helena Warwick, of her trembling confession, of the sapphire hidden within the painted frame. The case was over. Justice, or some version of it, had been done. And yet, the symmetry still disturbed him. He had closed the circle too easily. As the train gathered speed, a porter appeared at the door, bowing slightly. "Telegram for you, Monsieur Poirot. It was delivered just before departure." Poirot accepted the folded slip with mild surprise. The envelope bore the seal of the British Embassy in Vienna. He opened it delicately. From Colonel Weiss, urgent. Found sealed envelope among Countess von Lichtenfeld's private papers, marked, "To be opened upon my death. Addressed to you. Forwarding by next courier to Paris. Advise extreme discretion." Poirot's brows rose slightly. "Mais enfin," he murmured. "Even the dead, they cannot leave me in peace." He smiled faintly, but his mind began to stir again, the quiet restlessness of the detective whose work is never truly done. The rhythmic clatter of wheels and rails lulled the compartment into near silence. Poirot closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift back over the case. The Countess, cold, imperious, her eyes sharp as the facets of her jewels. Lady Helena, fragile, desperate, driven by fear and love. Adrian Warwick, proud, reckless, doomed by devotion. Each had played their part in the tragic symphony, but somewhere in the music there was a note still unresolved. He opened his eyes. The window now reflected only darkness, his own image haloed by lamplight. He leaned forward, speaking softly to himself. "Perhaps, Hercule, you are too suspicious, eh? You see mystery even in the silence. But," he tapped his temple lightly, "when the little grey cells whisper, one must listen." By morning, the train had crossed into Germany. The snow had thinned, revealing stretches of frost-bitten countryside. Poirot breakfasted in the dining car, surrounded by the subdued chatter of travellers. Opposite him sat a tall man reading Le Figaro, his face hidden behind the newspaper. The man lowered it once, just enough for Poirot to glimpse the faint scar along his jaw, a soldier's scar. Poirot gave a courteous nod. The man did not return it. Curious. He paid his bill, returned to his compartment, and found upon the seat a small square parcel wrapped in brown paper. He frowned, checked the label. His name was written upon it in delicate, slanting handwriting. Beneath the words, "From the late Countess von Lichtenfels." Poirot sat very still. Then, with delicate care, he unwrapped the parcel. Inside lay a single object, a thin, leather-bound diary no larger than a pocketbook. On its cover, in gold script, the initials E.L., Countess Elsbeth von Lichtenfels. He opened the first page. The handwriting was neat, severe, precise, like its author. Vienna, 4th of January. The wedding draws near. Helena's fiancé pleases neither me nor the memory of her father. I fear I have been too lenient. He smiles too easily, spends too freely, and loves her too much. Love, I have learned, is rarely innocent. 5. January. The sapphire troubles me. Its legend is not false. It brings sorrow to all who covet it. I have arranged for a replica to be worn at the ceremony. The true stone I shall hide, where only a heart untainted by greed may find it. Poirot nodded slowly. So, she knew. She feared the curse, but also perhaps used it as a weapon. He turned the pages carefully until one passage arrested him. 8th of January. My lawyer brings news from London. The accounts, altered, falsified. By whom, he will not yet say. But the pattern is clear. Someone has taken what is mine. And I think I know who. Poirot's fingers tightened slightly upon the page. The next entry was brief, its tone colder still. 9. January. I cannot confront him yet. Helena would not believe me. Adrian has the charm of devils. But when the waltz ends, he shall face silence. And then, the final entry, dated the night before her death. 10th January. There is another. Watching, listening, someone in my own house. I have left this book with instructions that it reach Monsieur Poirot should I die. Perhaps he will see what I could not, or what I refused to see. If so, let him look not to the sapphire nor the lovers, but to the one who profits from their ruin. Poirot sat very still. Mon Dieu, he whispered, the one who profits. He read the final line again, the careful script etched in black ink, deliberate and precise. The Countess had not named them. She had only left a direction, a clue. Who profited? Not Helena. She was ruined. Not Adrian. He was imprisoned. The sapphire was returned, the scandal public. Who then? Poirot closed the diary and gazed out at the bleak landscape rolling past the window. A light snow had begun to fall once more, soft, soundless. Slowly, the truth began to unfold in his mind, like a waltz played backward. He arrived in Paris at dusk. The courier was waiting at the platform, carrying the official letter from the embassy. Poirot thanked him and returned to his hotel, opening the envelope by the fire. Inside was a single folded sheet, the Countess's letter, her last waltz. He read, Monsieur Poirot, if you are reading this, I am no longer alive. I do not ask for justice, I ask for understanding. The sapphire is cursed not by legend, but by men, by their hunger. I have seen in my lifetime that those who handle beauty too carelessly destroy it. My son, Henrik, was such a man. I gave him all, and he gambled it away. He will inherit nothing, and he knows it. He is clever, charming, and cruel. I believe he seeks to have me declared unstable, to claim the estate for himself once I am gone. Should I die under strange circumstances, I beg you, look to him. He moves in silence, but leaves behind the faint scent of tobacco and betrayal. E.L. Poirot lowered the letter, his eyes thoughtful, grave. Henrik von Lichtenfels, the Countess's estranged son, absent, unmentioned, but not forgotten. And suddenly the fragments shifted into place, the missing clasp, the planted evidence, the locked door. A mind, cold and calculating, had arranged it all, manipulating both Helena and Adrian into ruin. Le bon Dieu, Poirot murmured. The Countess was never meant to die that night. She was meant to be destroyed, as reputation, as legacy. The murder was convenience, not passion. He sat back, the firelight flickering across his face. And the son, he remains free, the inheritor of all. Helena will stand trial for a crime whose true author smiles in the shadows. He folded the letter, placed it beside the diary, and sighed. So it begins again, he said softly. The dance continues, the last waltz of Vienna. Outside, the bells of Paris chimed midnight. Poirot rose, straightened his cuffs, and looked into the fire. His reflection trembled in the glass like a ghost, precise, solitary, burdened by truth. Ah, he whispered, they never truly end. these affairs of the heart and of the jewel, one leads always to the other. He extinguished the lamp, but his eyes remained open long after the room had darkened, the little grey cells restless once more, already composing their next dance. Chapter 7. The Son of Shadows. When Hercule Poirot returned to Vienna, the snow had melted into silver rain, and the city had resumed its glittering rhythm. As though scandal and death were only minor interruptions in its social calendar. The grand hotels were once again full of laughter. The orchestras played their waltzes, and in the cafes people whispered of politics and poetry, not of murder. Poirot arrived quietly, without ceremony or official notice. His ticket bore the name Monsieur Jules Lefebvre, a minor Belgian antiquarian. It amused him, this small disguise, but discretion, he knew, was the key to truth. For a liar grows cautious in the presence of fame. He took rooms at the Hotel Bristol, a place of chandeliers and civility, frequented by diplomats and the decadent alike, and from his window he could see the outline of Schönbrunn's spires in the mist. Vienna, elegant and treacherous as ever, waited. He began his inquiries as he always did, politely, precisely, and without haste. A word with the hotel concierge revealed that Herr Henrik von Lichtenfels, newly returned from Zurich, had taken up residence in the Ringstrasse villa once, belonging to his mother. The newspapers spoke of his quiet restoration of family dignity and his intention to reopen the estate's art gallery to the public. Poirot's lips twitched. Ah, yes, the redemption of appearances, always the first act of the guilty. He spent the day in the library perusing society columns, tracing Henrik's recent history. He found photographs. Henrik tall, handsome, immaculately dressed, his smile polished as a blade. A man who had inherited not only title and estate, but a reputation for charm that had already begun to eclipse his mother's scandal. At dusk, Poirot wrote a short note upon his monogrammed paper. Monsieur Lefebvre, antiquarian of Brussels, requests a brief audience with Herr von Lichtenfels to discuss the provenance of several family heirlooms formerly displayed at Schönbrunn Palace. He sealed it with wax and sent it by messenger. Within the hour, a reply returned, gracious, welcoming. Herr von Lichtenfels would be delighted to receive Monsieur Lefebvre for tea tomorrow at 4. Poirot smiled to himself. Voila, the spider welcomes the fly. The following afternoon, the Lichtenfels villa greeted him in restrained grandeur, no longer the morning house of a month ago, but a place revived. The servants were new. The rooms smelled of polish and fresh roses. Henrik received him in the drawing-room, rising from a low chair with practised ease. He was indeed, as the photographs promised, tall, poised, his blonde hair brushed back, his expression the very image of cultivated regret. Monsieur Lefebvre, he said, extending a hand. An honor. I have long admired your work on 17th-century European relics. Poirot bowed slightly. You are most kind, Herr von Lichtenfels. Your family's collection, I hear, was once among the finest in Austria. I am particularly interested in the history of one jewel, the Sapphire of Silesia. Henrik's smile did not falter. Ah, the infamous Sapphire. It has caused this house much sorrow, I fear. Indeed, Poirot said gently. The late Countess was most devoted to its preservation. Henrik's eyes, blue and clear, revealed nothing. My mother was devoted to many things, most of them destructive. Poirot studied him. His voice was smooth, his manner impeccable. But behind the civility, Poirot sensed something cold, almost mathematical. "You must miss her," he said softly. Henrik gave a faint laugh. "Miss her? Perhaps. We had not spoken in years, you know. She believed I was, how shall I put it, unworthy. Too fond of risk. Too modern for her tastes." Poirot nodded. "And yet she named you her heir." Henrik shrugged lightly. "Blood is blood, Monsieur Lefebvre. In the end, we all forgive our families, or bury them." For a moment, neither spoke. Poirot's gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, where a portrait of the Countess hung once more, restored, framed, and, curiously, unaltered. "Ah," he murmured. "She watches still." Henrik's tone was casual, but his eyes flickered toward the portrait. "My mother loved her likeness more than her life. I had it returned exactly as it was found." Poirot's mind noted the phrasing, exactly as it was found. The secret compartment behind the frame, now resealed, repainted, a performance of innocence. He smiled pleasantly. "A fine tribute, monsieur. The art of restoration is not unlike the art of deception. One conceals the cracks without erasing them." Henrik's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "You speak as though you know the craft well." "Only as an observer," Poirot replied. "It is my habit to study surfaces and the tiny fractures beneath them." They took tea, delicately, almost ceremoniously. Henrik spoke of business ventures, of art and architecture, of Vienna's slow recovery from scandal. His charm was deliberate, his anecdotes well chosen, but his laughter never reached his eyes. At last, Poirot set down his cup. "I am curious," he said, "about your mother's final days. You were abroad, I believe." "In Zurich," Henrik said easily, "attending to certain financial matters." "Of course. And yet, her lawyer received instructions mere hours before her death, signed, sealed, and witnessed, altering her will. You were reinstated as primary heir. How remarkable, no?" Henrik's hand paused for only an instant before he reached for the sugar spoon. "My mother was sentimental. She changed her mind often." Poirot nodded gravely. "Sentimental? Yes, but not foolish. The Countess was a woman of exactitude. Every gesture precise, every word weighed." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Herr von Lichtenfels, did you know she kept a diary?" Henrik's eyes for the first time betrayed a flicker of alarm. "A diary?" "Oui, written until the night before her death. It speaks of her distrust, of a certain man, clever, charming, ambitious, a son who had lost her fortune and intended to reclaim it through madness or murder." The silence between them grew taut. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the room. At last, Henrik smiled faintly, but his voice had lost its ease. "You have quite an imagination, Monsieur Lefebvre." Poirot smiled back, equally calm. "Imagination, perhaps, but the diary, it exists. I have read it." Henrik rose slowly, moving to the window. "If this is a threat, it is wasted. The authorities have closed the case. My mother's death is solved." Poirot's voice sharpened. "No, monsieur, it was arranged. You crafted a play, a tragedy, complete with lovers, guilt, and a cursed jewel. You used Helena's fear, Adrian's devotion to weave a perfect deception. When the curtain fell, all believed the story you had written." Henrik turned, the faintest shadow of irritation darkening his face. "And you, Monsieur Lefebvre, or shall I say, Monsieur Poirot, you believe you can rewrite it?" Poirot smiled, the game at last unveiled. "Touché, monsieur. It was not difficult. You see, the disguise of Lefebvre may fool the eye, but not the mirror, and I observe everything. Henrik stepped closer. His charm was gone now, replaced by the cool menace of a man exposed. You have no proof. Ah, Poirot said softly, but I have the letter. Henrik froze. The one your mother addressed to me. She knew. She left it in the care of the embassy, to be delivered only upon her death. In it, she names you, monsieur. For a long moment, the two men faced each other, intellect against arrogance, calm against calculation. Then Henrik exhaled, almost lazily. Then what now, monsieur? You intend to drag my name through scandal again, to destroy what remains of my family? Poirot's voice was gentle, almost sorrowful. You destroyed it yourself. I merely removed the veil. Henrik's smile returned, thin, dangerous. You forget, monsieur. Vienna adores its legends. It will not believe you over the dead. Perhaps, Poirot said, rising. But I am patient. Truth, monsieur, is like the sapphire you so coveted. It may be hidden, imitated, even stolen, but it endures. He took his hat, bowed slightly, and when it is found, it cuts. As Poirot left the villa, dusk had fallen over Vienna. The lamps glowed softly through the fog. A carriage passed, its wheels hissing upon the wet cobbles. He walked slowly toward the gate, every sense alert. Behind him, the great house stood still, beautiful, unrepentant. Poirot did not look back. He merely murmured to himself, "The son of shadows, but even shadows require light to exist. And light, it always returns." Chapter 10. The Sapphire's Secret. Morning light broke over Vienna with a frail grace, the kind that only comes after a long storm. In the grand ballroom of the Schönbrunn Palace, now silent, its chandeliers cold, its music long fled, Hercule Poirot stood by the high-arched window, hands clasped neatly behind his back. The world outside was pale and damp, a city recovering from too much beauty and too much deceit. The police car outside purred softly, its engine idling in the mist. Henrik von Lichtenfels, the charming heir, the collector of secrets, sat inside, expressionless, staring at his cuffed wrists. It was a strange sight. The once polished man who had waltzed through scandal and suspicion alike now looked hollow, like a mask removed after the masquerade. Inspector Weiss stood nearby, hat in hand, still not entirely sure how Poirot had reached his conclusion. "I must say, Monsieur Poirot," he murmured, "you make it look simple. Yet I cannot imagine how one begins to suspect a man so impeccable." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, that is precisely why one suspects him. The perfection, when it is too smooth, too polished, often hides the flaw beneath. The impeccable man leaves no trace, unless he wishes you to find the wrong one." Weiss frowned. But the Countess's confession, her letter exonerated Adrian. "Oui, but it also concealed something," Poirot said softly. "Helena wrote that she had stolen the sapphire for love. That, my friend, was true, but love is not always for a man. Sometimes it is for the memory of one." He turned, gesturing toward the grand portrait on the wall, the late Count, painted in the prime of his youth, with eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and vanity. You see, Henrik was not only the Count's protégé. He was his son, illegitimate, yes, but raised under the shadow of a promise. The Count had given his mistress a single sapphire, the twin to his wife's. That was the secret Helena discovered on the eve of the royal wedding. Weiss's eyes widened. And she confronted him? Not him, Henrik. She went to him, in anger, perhaps pity, perhaps pride. she meant to shame him with the truth. But Henrik had lived too long in the shade of nobility to let a woman, any woman, ruin his inheritance. When she showed him the sapphire and spoke of scandal, he saw his ruin. And so he acted. Poirot's voice softened, the air in the room seeming to grow still around him. It was not premeditated. The struggle, the fall, the silence that followed, these were born of fear, not malice. Yet afterward, he saw what could be gained. He placed the sapphire where it would incriminate Adrian, wrote a false letter in the Countess's hand, and disappeared behind his charm once again. Weiss let out a low breath. Mon Dieu! And the missing sapphire? Poirot reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet pouch. It was never truly missing, only misplaced. It had been hidden, not by Henrik, but by the Countess herself, inside the frame of that portrait. A symbol, you see. The jewel was always meant to rest with the man who had deceived her first. He handed the pouch to Weiss. It is poetic, no. The truth hiding in plain sight, the jewel inside its master's likeness. For a moment there was only the sound of distant bells from St. Stephen's Cathedral, faint through the mist. Poirot walked slowly toward the window again, his reflection merging with the glass, his expression unreadable. Weiss adjusted his coat. "You'll be leaving Vienna now?" Poirot gave a small nod. "Oui, the case is closed. Justice has been done, at least, as far as man's justice allows." He smiled without mirth. "The rest, as always, remains with le bon Dieu." As Weiss departed, Poirot remained in the ballroom, the silence thick with the memory of music. He moved to the grand piano, running a finger along its keys. One note rang softly in the empty space, clear, sad, and final. He spoke, almost to himself. "It is always the same, these affairs of the heart. They begin with passion and end with possession." Outside, the car door slammed shut. Henrik was driven away, his reflection vanishing behind the rain, spattered glass. A chapter closed, neatly, efficiently, as all good stories must. Poirot left the palace and stepped into the fog. The morning was cold, but not unfriendly. A coach waited for him at the gate, bound for the station. As it rattled through the cobblestone streets, Vienna unfurled around him like a dream dissipating, its grandeur too ornate for innocence. He thought of Helena, of Adrian, of Henrik, their fates entwined like threads in a tapestry too intricate to unpick without tearing the fabric itself. And yet, Poirot reflected, the truth was not a knife, but a mirror. It showed what had always been there. The train whistle echoed across the station when he arrived. He boarded with the same quiet grace that had marked his arrival weeks ago, the conductor bowing as he passed. Inside, the compartment was warm and faintly perfumed with tobacco and polish. Poirot sat, adjusted his cuffs, and drew from his pocket a small envelope, the Countess's final letter, now closed and sealed once more. He read the last line again, under his breath. "In every sapphire there is a flaw, and it is that which makes it precious." He smiled faintly. "Ah, madame, you understood. Even perfection without flaw would be monstrous." As the train pulled away, Vienna receded into the mist, its palaces, its scandals, its sorrows, all swallowed by the turning of the wheels and the quiet hum of fate fulfilled. Poirot closed his eyes. The case of the Sapphire widow was over. And somewhere in the depths of his mind, the little grey cells rested, content, for now, until the next dance with mystery began.